All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. It's a wonderful opportunity that we're pleased to share with you today. This is our first program in a series that we're calling Difference Makers. This series will be highlighting local, national, and international organizations who are truly making a strong, significant impact on the global scale right now. Organizations that are doing important work that maybe you don't immediately think about when we think about the ongoing challenges, trials, tribulation that we have here in our world right now. And we're very pleased to be talking with Chris Watley from the Halo Trust, who's with us today. It should be a wonderful conversation, a wonderful program to highlight what they do. Again, the Halo Trust is the world's largest humanitarian landmine clearance organization, operating in over 30 countries and territories around the world. So again, my name is Evan Raplu. I serve as the executive director of the organization, the International Relations Council. Have existed in 70 years here in Kansas City, with the mission of increasing civic engagement and dialogue around world events and global issues. Our commitment to the community is very strong right now, and I think that with where we are in terms of the way that we're receiving information, the constant communication that we have online, having these type of conversations, whether they're in person on Zoom, is very important to having a strong sense of civic engagement. So very much encourage you to learn more about the organization irckc.org on our website. Basically, it's going to work. Chris is going to give some introductory remarks about Halo Trust. I'm going to then engage with Chris in a moderated Q&A dialogue, and then we'll have time at the end to take questions from you. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A button. There you can type in your questions, and I'll be happy to deliver them to Chris. So without further ado here, Chris Watley serves as the executive director of Halo USA, the U.S. arm of the Halo Trust. Again, the world's largest humanitarian landmine clearance organization. Prior to joining Halo, Chris served as executive director of the United Nations Association of the United States, a program of the United Nations Foundation. Chris led UNA's national staff in DC and New York, advocating for the UN's mission, leading fundraising efforts, and advancing private sector partnerships with UN agencies. Chris has an extensive background working on the global scale. We're very pleased to have you today, Chris, and I'll let you take it away.
Great. Well, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be able to speak with IRC. I'm somebody who's a fan of Kansas City. I've made a couple of kind of barbecue pilgrimages over the course of the last 20 years or so. And it's an amazing town, in terms of economic vibrancy, culture, but also food. I'm a huge fan of Oklahoma Joe's on the Johnson County side, but also the great places around the plaza too. So always good to have a reason to connect with Kansas City, and I'm grateful to anyone who's making time to be with us today. So as Evan said, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on Halo, but more importantly, what landmine clearance is as a humanitarian endeavor and how it connects with American interests and goals. So to do that, I'm going to share my slides here. So just bear with me for a second. All right. Evan, can you let me know if you're seeing this?
Yes, you are good.
Good. All right. All right. As Evan mentioned, we are the Halo Trust. We're the world's largest landmine clearance organization, a humanitarian landmine clearance, as opposed to military landmine clearance. We've got 12,000 employees around the world. I'll show you a sense of that distribution. But our core mission is to save lives from landmines and other explosives in conflict settings. Both conflicts that are ongoing right now, like the ones that are in the news cycle, but also legacy conflicts going back as far as World War II. All right. So we were founded in 1988. And there's a reason for that. This image that you see here, if you're my age, you can probably remember this from the news cycle. This is the bridge that connects Afghanistan with what was the Soviet Union at that time. And these are the last Soviet soldiers rolling out of Afghanistan in 1988. They're rolling out, and Halo is being founded and moving right in that conflict over the course of the 80s had left Afghanistan the most landmine impacted country in the world with millions of mines in the ground. All of these years later, so 37 years later, we're still there. We still have over 1,000 staff in Afghanistan. We've been there from the Soviet withdrawal, the Taliban takeover, 9/11, the US and NATO intervention, the US and NATO departure, all of that. We've been there, in part because there's still a humanitarian need on the ground. That's us in our beginning. But to the extent that anyone on this call has probably ever heard of us, I'm guessing it's this image from 1997. So this is just 6 months before Princess Diana dies. She visits the Halo Trust in Angola, in actually the second largest city of Angola called Huambo, which we have since made mine-free. You see that image and you think that she's in the middle of a field, in a rural setting. It's actually, there are big buildings. If you were looking in the other direction, it's just the whole city had been flattened by the war. The vegetation had grown around it. And you had, the second largest city in Angola with people living on top of these minefields. She made Halo, and she made the cause of landmines front and center for the global population because she was the most famous woman in the world. She still has the record for being on the front page or the front cover of People magazine more than any other human in history. And that moment drove a major international event, the passage of the International Mine Ban Convention, which was adopted shortly after her tragic death in August. So truly, someone who did an amazing, accomplished an amazing multilateral achievement and an amazing humanitarian benefit that echoes out over those decades. And to the extent that anyone thinks of us, they think of that moment. But this is who we are today. Those 12,000 employees are distributed across 30 different programs. The ones in blue are legacy conflicts. So like Angola, which you see down there on the southwest coast of Africa, and places like Colombia, where the fighting in to some extent is still going on a little bit, but the big phase of the conflict with the FARC is behind us, and we're able to clear legacy areas. And then the ones in red are the ones that are much closer to the news cycle. These are ongoing conflicts where we have large operations in areas where we are able to get to because the fighting has moved on. And that's what this looks like. Sadly, really, even in my time with Halo, so I'm 6 years into my journey with Halo, and we've seen conflict pick up in a dramatic way in those years. We were already working in Ukraine going back to 2016 in those areas of the east of the country called the Donbass, where there had been an insurgency from the time that the Russians took over Crimea, but it was fairly low level. The Russian invasion in 2022 dramatically changed things. But also at the same time, Ethiopia has gone through a civil conflict where there's massive mine laying. Myanmar or Burma has gone through this civil conflict where there's ongoing mine laying. We have this new uptick in the kind of active use of landmines as a method of conflict. And partially that's just because conflict itself is picked up, but also the parties to that conflict have access to stores of landmines from some of the big countries that never joined the Mine Ban Convention. And some of you as international experts will know that the US never joined, but we have abided by it in large measure. We destroyed our stockpiles of legacy landmines. We haven't been building the kind of landmines that you see in movies and things like that since way back in the 90s. But for the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans in particular, these are countries that still have stockpiles of millions of landmines and that are pitching up in battlefields where we are clearing today. So unfortunately, an uptick in the need for the work that we do. So our operating concept is those 12,000 employees. They don't look like me. They don't look like my British counterparts in our HQ in Scotland. That our model has always been to bring in a very, very small core of trained specialists. Some of them former military, but not all. We also take people who come from all walks of life and put them through years of training to be true experts in what we do. And then they deploy out into countries and hire impacted community members. Often people who've been we recruited out of internet refugee camps or internal displaced persons camps. Hire them and train them with the skills that our deployable experts have. And that's how we built up our program. So this is a woman in Ukraine. We have a very gender balanced workforce in Ukraine, in part because so many of the men are off fighting on the front line. And we have some of the most fascinating profiles of our workforce. We have former filmmakers, we have engineers and IT professionals. It's the most highly educated demining workforce that we have in the world. We have about 1,500 in Ukraine. And that's because Ukraine's this amazing place with these tremendously skilled individuals, but also so many people want to do something to help their country recover and survive this conflict. And joining Halo next to joining the military is one of those things. So let's talk about Ukraine, because what I'm going to do before I turn it back over to Evan is I'm going to give you a couple of examples of where we work: active conflict, legacy conflict, and then I'm going to try to connect that to basic U.S. interests. And that I'm going to make the assumption that most people on this call, by virtue of your interest in international affairs and your membership in something like IRC, you probably have a broad sense of the value of humanitarian interventions for American foreign policy. So just the act of saving lives itself is probably something that you see utility in. But we are obviously in a moment in which all aspects of U.S. assistance are being reviewed, and we need to show how our work connects to hard U.S. interests, as well as those kind of value propositions of we're Americans and we want to save lives, and no one from any stripe of the political spectrum wants kids to blow up on their way to school. We can all agree on that, but we got to make tough choices. So we need to show things in the light in which they are most appropriate for our interest and our limited amount of resources that we can deploy. So Russia. The Russians have laid landmines in Ukraine, as you can guess from the news cycle, at an industrial scale. So there's probably 2 million mines that have been laid in Ukraine, in the areas that have been newly occupied by the Russians since the end of February 2022, when this phase of the war started. A lot of it looks like this. The vast majority of landmines that we are clearing are anti-tank mines. That's what this soldier is laying. They look about the size of a pizza. Often they're surface laid. Sometimes they're buried, but they are the biggest feature of landmines in this conflict. The places where we're operating and where they're causing casualties, because this is a heat map of civilian losses from landmines since the beginning of this phase of the war. And if you were to look at this and I were to superimpose just the line of control that the Russians have had over the course of the war, you would see why those dots are there. In that, if you look at the north of the map, you see where the Russians had their initial invasion in February to the end of March, where they got almost to the gates of Kyiv. They held for about a month. They didn't have very long to do landmine emplacement, so there aren't millions in the north of the country. It was, defending fighting positions and things like that, but then they were pushed out quickly. These are highly populated areas. The civilians moved in quickly, and a lot of casualties as a result of that. We still have teams clearing across northern Ukraine, but actually the majority of our work now, because much of the most high impact, high density explosive contamination we've been able to clear over the last few years, but it's more along the northeast edge of that map that you're looking at, towards Kharkiv, and down in the south, Mykolaiv and Kherson. These are areas that the Russians held for 6 months. They were pushed out in September of 2022. They had time to do industrial scale landmine laying, and therefore you're still having tons and tons of casualties. A lot of the casualties that we're seeing are actually farmers. It's that, Ukraine is this massive important part of the global food system. In fact, before the Russian invasion, Ukraine in an average year was feeding 400 million people worldwide. And it's why when the Russians did invade, in the week thereafter, the price of cooking oil in the United States shot up by 50% because they're just such a massive part of global food production that taking that level of production out of the market affects American grocery bills, as well as, perhaps more importantly, it leads to critical food shortages in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, places like that. So where we are clearing tends to be right now on agricultural lands where you've got farmers who need to get out there and feed their own families and pay the bills. You got the world waiting for them to get their grain back into production. You can't wait any longer. You get on your farm, your tractor, you get out in the field, and you blow up on it, one of those anti-tank mines that I just showed you. And our clearance often looks like this. So like if you look to that boundary to the right, these are these kind of raised areas that separate these huge farm fields in Ukraine. It looks like a pretty easy task to clear, in that like many of the areas that we're clearing in the south and in the northeast, the Russians did a lot of surface mine laying like this, and that they were trying they were doing it quickly. They were trying to prevent armored counterattacks. So vehicle-borne attacks. The challenge for us is that in the years since, you've had vegetation grow up across this whole area. So you're seeing an area that we've already prepped using these kind of remote-controlled armored lawnmowers. Because getting out there and clearing that vegetation so that we can come in and detonate these mines is the first challenge we face, because often laced within these, although the majority of the threat are these anti-tank mines, are tripwire-based grenades on a tree, like the trees you see behind you, or tripwire stake mines. And we have to clear all tripwire threats before we can get through an area like this. Those robo-cuts, these armored automatic lawnmowers, have increased our productivity extensively. So this is what that looks like. And the goal of it is to enable Ukraine to pay for its own war, to meet its own needs, to play the role in the global food supply system that is necessary for our own grocery store prices, but also feeding vast areas of the world which otherwise face critical food insecurity. And actually, one of the biggest sources of migration flows have been the moments in which the global food supply has been insufficient to meet the basic needs of populations who are sitting in major refugee camps. Such as if we go back to 2015 and the huge migration flows that went into Europe and then have now redefined European politics, it's because the WFP in places like Yemen and Syria and Lebanon, with Syrian refugees around Syria, had to reduce their calorie counts that they were providing to families by about 40%. And if your family's sitting there, you still got $1,000 worth of cash, you can either spend that down to just try to feed yourself because you're no longer getting enough calories out of the UN system to be able to stay where you are, or do you bolt and use the last remaining cash to get out there and hopefully find a new life? You leave. So for us, getting this ag production back up is about Ukraine's ability to chart its own future, pay its own way. It's about American grocery prices. It's about stabilizing areas in the world that otherwise would be unstable, drive migration flows because of a lack of access to food. So that's active conflict in Ukraine. The other example I'm going to give you is legacy. So I showed you the picture of Princess Diana in Angola in 1997. The major contamination that we clear in Angola comes from the South African invasion of Angola, beginning in the really late 70s into the 80s, but peaking in 1988. You're seeing an image here from the Battle of Cuito Cuanavale, where the South Africans made a big push up from Namibia. They were confronted by not just the Angolan army, but the Cuban army, and the largest tank battle since World War II on the African continent took place. So very large-scale conflict. It then stabilized. Both sides laid these huge barrier minefields. But then there's scattered minefields all over the rest of the country as well. So this is a conflict that's over. fortunately, the kind of rebel movement that the South Africans and also the United States in the Cold War, and that we were worried about Cuban involvement in Angola, so we were supporting the UNITA movement as well. That movement was ultimately defeated by the Angolans in 2002. Conflict is over. It's a peaceful place. We don't have to worry about any current conflict, but you have this vast legacy. So what are we doing, and how does that affect U.S. national interests? Obviously, the idea of ensuring that Angolans can go back to their lives and not blow up on landmines is a good thing, but let's think about other aspects of how it might intersect with us. So one is I think that we're part of a dialogue in the United States right now about critical minerals. It has come out of the blue. Rare earth minerals are not something I was thinking of even 5 years ago. Now it's something that seems to be, driving erudite conversations around foreign policy all the time. This administration, the Trump administration, like the Biden administration before, is very focused on ensuring that we diversify U.S. critical mineral sources, not just the rare earth minerals, but there's a list of 50 different major minerals that are essential for defense industries, for electronics, for the AI revolution, lots of other things. And so many of them come from sub-Saharan Africa. So many of them come from this area that connects from Tanzania on the east coast of Africa all the way out to Angola and the port of Lobito. And it's referred to as the Lobito Corridor because right now the rail lines, particularly in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Tanzania, they all go out to the eastern ports, which the Chinese have basically a monopoly over. They're railroads that were built by the Chinese, quite frankly, going back to the 70s, because they were actually Tanzania in particular had a very strong relationship with Maoist China. We need to get access to those mineral resources as well. And also there are points along that western arc in which they are not being exploited because they've been cut off by landmines and the infrastructure was basically destroyed in the war. So the U.S. is giving a lot of loans, not aid, but through loans to support the infrastructure on that corridor. And the clearance of it is essential for getting it back up and running so that we can have access to those minerals. It's very much part of this, competition that we're in with China over ensuring that we have the economic inputs that we need for our own ambitions and quality of life. So from us, from the Halo side, why do we clear landmines? Because they kill people, and we are in the business of saving civilians. We are a pure humanitarian organization, but we do need to show how our work does that, achieves that independent humanitarian goal, but also connects with other equities in a time in which we have limited resources, and we need to show how those things happen. So that's the economic argument. I'll say there's another argument that Angola is also part of one of the most important ecosystems in the world. So this sub-map I'm showing is way down at the bottom of southeast Angola, where it comes together with Botswana and Namibia. And there's a river system that flows into something called the Okavango Delta in Botswana, where the world's largest population remaining large population of wild African elephants lives, even bigger than all of the populations in Kenya, or that particular population is larger than any other single population. It is a conservation success story. It's bursting at the seams. They're at the point where they need to cull elephants because it's grown so large. But upstream from the Okavango Delta is the traditional range of African elephants that some of you, if you see that elephant superimposed in the picture, if you've ever taken a school trip to Washington, D.C., and the bus drops you off at the Museum of Natural History and you walk through the door, as I did as a 5-year-old, that's the first thing you see. You see the largest African elephant ever harvested in the wild, ever hunted in the wild. It came from this green area you see on the map. It was an Angolan elephant because prior to the beginning of the Civil War in Angola, prior to around 1975, that huge population in Botswana moved naturally up the source waters of the Okavango to where where the basin actually starts in the highlands. But basically, the population remaining, it did not become extinct. There's a small population of elephants that survived through the war, but de minimis. And basically, the actual migration flow was blocked. The elephants stopped migrating back and forth because they were blowing up and dying on landmines the same way that humans do. So the Angolan government, in its wisdom, has invested itself, so its own resources, in investing in Halo, and then we've complemented it with a lot of private resources to clear these minefields. That's what those red dots are. We are about halfway to having it done. The Angolan government has invested $60 million in this effort. And the idea is to connect and create these huge national parks to allow Angola to be connected to the $2 billion sustainable tourism economy that sits right there in the Okavango Delta in Botswana. There is a very real economic opportunity for them. They want to do this for their own economic benefit. But if they do that, they will also achieve this vast, globally important conservation outcome of saving not only the elephant population, but you also have these peatlands along the way that otherwise would be probably set on fire and used for agriculture if they weren't created as a national park, that are one of the largest carbon stores of the globe. So helping Angola achieve this outcome, which, quite frankly, the U.S. government's invested some of this too, but basically the Angolan government is putting in $6 for every $1 that the U.S. is putting in, and then we're also leveraging about another private sector, largely U.S. private donor dollar as well. And you have this possibility of new opportunity for Angola. You have this potential to save this great charismatic resource that the world cares about, and to protect that important carbon store as well. So once again, another way that we're describing our work, and this is one where we've gotten tremendous bipartisan support. When it comes to conservation, there's a huge constituency of Republicans and Democrats both. No one wants to see these populations be depleted. And then I'm going to give you one other way that we describe our work. So our work, which is about saving civilian lives in conflict settings, current conflicts and post-conflicts, we use instruments that are also used by soldiers in the conflicts that are raging in the world today. And that fortunately, American soldiers aren't facing minefields every day. But as we've seen from just this week, where the U.S. is engaged in military action in Iran, it didn't turn into the need for U.S. forces to storm a beach in the Persian Gulf, thank God. But if they did, they would be using mine detectors to do it. And quite frankly, one of the best things, one of the most cost-effective things that the U.S. government invests in us is there's this $23 million a year program, $23 million globally. We're not receiving $23 million from it, that takes Army equipment, advanced detectors, and loans them, doesn't give them, but loans them to Halo and to other demining organizations. And we get to use the most advanced detectors in the world, and it increases our efficiency sometimes by as much as 500%. It depends on the setting. And the data on every single landmine we clear is recorded. We pass that back on to the U.S. Army, to Army's Futures Command, who runs this program. And they use that to make every detector that is sitting in the arsenal of an army, of a soldier or a Marine, that much more effective, so that they know how that detector performs with minimum metal Iranian mines that we are seeing in Syria today, or minimum metal Russian mines that we find in Angola. How they perform under soil conditions. Do they get false positives on certain elements that can be factored out in the software? So if U.S. soldiers ever have to storm the beach, ever have to go across the DMZ in the Korean Peninsula, they will do so safer, because that woman on the left in Cambodia, the same woman on the front end of the slide deck, and I'm headed to Cambodia this weekend, because she's going to clear a couple hundred landmines this year. Halo will clear over 100,000 explosives, landmines, unexploded ordnance too, about 120,000 this year. The data from all that makes U.S. soldiers safer. It's a point that we are always emphasizing to Congress. It's a wonderful thing. She will save more lives. because we're using that detector, and that soldier will be safer if, God forbid, he ever has to use it to breach a minefield to protect the soldiers behind him. I'm going to conclude with just some stats on our impact. So we like to say that our work is measurable, finite, it's scalable, and it's affordable. That it's measurable because whoever the donor may be, whether it's the U.S. government, whether it's the Angolan government, they know when they invest in us that there is a set amount of geography that we are able to clear, and that land is made clear for good. That's the final side. That there are a lot of other things that are going to be plaguing that community. It's not a comprehensive solution for the development of Angola, Ukraine, or anybody or any other place. But there's land that was locked away from productive use, sometimes for 50 years or more, because of death and danger from deadly explosives, and now it is available for productive use. There's a lot of other things that are going to have to happen in that community for it to reach prosperity, but this one's done. And you can choose to do, whether it's an individual village, some donor of ours who's investing in us to support that specific village, or a strategic area like the Lubito corridor for the U.S. government. You can get that done and move on. You don't make a commitment to continuously invest in that for decades and decades and decades. When you're done, you're done. It's scalable, as it says, and then affordable. And the vast majority of what we spend is that deminer, like the Cambodian woman in the previous slide. One other thing I want to mention is that because I've given you the Ukraine and Angola example. So Ukraine, this active conflict right now, where the real mine laying has only started in the last few years, and then you got Angola, where we can remember Princess Diana from 1997. Decades later, there's still another 1,000 minefields to clear. That's unacceptable anymore. The world can't wait 30 years for Ukraine to clear its landmine contamination and restore its food production. From the lands that are available right now, much less if there is a ceasefire or a conclusion to the conflict. And it doesn't have to be, in that we do have technologies now that could allow us to achieve step changes in clearance. One of them is like, the advanced detector we saw in the slide before, and thank you to the U.S. Army for providing those tools to us. Most of our U.S. government donors, global government donors, whether it's the State Department or the Germans or any number of global government donors, they tend to be very conservative on tech investments. They want to pay for the cost of the deminers and the diesel in our trucks and things like that. But if we say, could you, provide seed funding for us to develop AI technologies to better identify minefields and better, draw the boundaries of them so that we can make our clearance faster, those are things that they are very averse to. It's our private sector partners who have allowed us to do that. So we are starting to make huge leaps in technology, particularly in Ukraine, in part because we've got some tech partners like Amazon and others who are giving us lots of pro bono support, but also we have just such a fantastic workforce in Ukraine and an urgent need. So I think that if someone in my shoes gives this presentation in 10 years, the clearance rates are going to look utterly different because the technology allows that to happen, as long as we can continue to maintain support from the U.S. Army, from what they're giving us, and support from private sector partners. That's where it comes down to taking action. That program, that $23 million program, it only happens because U.S. constituents, individual Americans, reach out to Congress and say, that's a good idea, and not because there's someone in the U.S. Army who says, I don't want to help out saving civilians, but the Army's a big thing. The defense budget is vast. $23 million is rounding error. It's a little program that's run, in a little office in a fort in Virginia. It's really easy to forget about. And knowing how much that this knowledge helps equip those soldiers who may face a future conflict, because they're not going through those minefields right now, it's easy to forget that in the context of other big decisions you have to make. So we're always having to fight for U.S. support for that equipment from the U.S. Army, but also for our support from the U.S. Department of State. We are funded not out of USAID or some of the other things that have been in the news cycle. We are funded out of the Political Military Affairs Bureau of the State Department. We are part of security assistance that the State Department provides to countries around the world. So those two sources, U.S. State Department security assistance funding through something called the Conventional Weapons Destruction Account, and then the U.S. Army through the Humanitarian Demining Research and Development Account, those are absolutely essential to achieving that tech vision. So if any of you are interested in clicking on that URL code and sending a quick message to Congress, we would be deeply, deeply grateful. And as I close out with questions, this is a scene from Zimbabwe. It's also one of those places that has benefited in the past from U.S. Army equipment. The question being asked by the teacher to that classroom in a place called Mount Darwin that I've spent some time is he's asking how many kids had to walk through a minefield to get to school today. And as you see, most hands are up. Now, kind of shocking. These are landmines that were laid by the Rhodesians. These are South African produced landmines that would have been laid when their grandparents were children. They're laid all around this community, and they've created pathways through them where, if you just stay on this path, you'll be safe. But if you veer off that path, they are some of the most deadly minefields that we've dealt with. They're the most dense minefields that we deal with anywhere. And there are these plastic landmines that will stay deadly for another 100 years until they're cleared. And, they've found ways to go through these narrow paths to get to school. Usually there's like one parent escorting 10 kids or so at a time. But think about that. Think about taking your 7-year-old kid to school, and that if they just chase a butterfly, it's over. They find a way, but think about how that stresses you out. This is from a couple of years ago. We've cleared it. Mount Darwin is mine-free now. There are a lot of other classrooms that look like this, but in terms of that, scalability, that's something you can be done with that. It's another question as to all those other services that those kids will need to be successful in life. But this is something that we can do. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, for taking us through the incredible work that Halo is doing, has done. The scope of the work that you're doing is sort of indescribable, and I think is someone living here in the United States, as you just highlighted with that past slide, the day-to-day anxiety of living in an active landmine area is really hard to it's hard to fathom. So I think you did a good job at highlighting the work of the organization, as well as just how devastating active landmine zones can be. I have a lot of questions that I was scribbling down as you were talking, but 12,000 employees. I mean, I was so curious about the training process that these people are going through to engage with this work. Who is doing the training? What does this training entail? I'm very curious if you could elaborate a bit on that process.
You bet. Well, we have a core training team that, a lot of the skills that we developed started with military landmine clearance skills. So we were founded by former British soldiers. A lot of those skills were carried over and then made to focus specifically on humanitarian tasks, which allows you to simplify some things and that you're doing work that you're not under fire while you do it. And we have a training team that has taken those skills that came to us originally, going back 30 years. But then we've learned lots of things just, in the succeeding decades. So basically, Halo itself will hire someone from any background. There's always an open call for proposal for new field officers in Halo. It's a bit like joining the Peace Corps or something like that. You come to it with whatever your skills are. You don't have to be former military. We do have a lot of former Peace Corps volunteers who've joined us. You can come from any number of walks of life. You just need to be really dedicated, and you go through a rigorous screening process. And then we'll spend about 2 years training you to be a field operative. And at that point, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be supervising, probably when you finish that training, a unit of about 200 deminers. And it's going to have its own training capacity. And then the country level program will have an additional training team as well. those levels of training are host country nationals alone for the most part, but you're supervising on all of that. And from there, what you do is you're recruiting as you move, as you finish clearing an area like that community in Zimbabwe. We're done, so you move over to another area. You start recruiting from it. You're hiring locals from that community. They go through about 6 weeks of training. You can go from zero to being safe as a basic deminer in about 6 weeks' time, as long as you follow the protocols very carefully.
Yeah, I think having that local engagement in that way and hiring people from local communities is incredibly important. Not only obviously they have a massive interest in keeping their communities safe, but just to engage the local community in that way, I think is particularly special and a very commendable thing that you do. I was hoping you could also talk a little bit about, obviously you said the UK branch based there in Scotland versus the US branch here based in DC. Can you talk about the difference in the scope of the work, the way that you work together, different how maybe goals differently, or which areas of the world you're focusing on in each branch?
You bet. Really, our mission as Halo USA is about mobilizing U.S. support for mine clearance globally. So we advocate not just for Halo's budget, but for any investments by the U.S. government in landmine clearance. Hence our advocacy mission and why we've got great colleagues who are focused on the Hill so much. Then we manage our relationship with the U.S. State Department, which is the largest donor worldwide to landmine clearance. And then we also support our U.S. philanthropy. So the Halo USA mission, of the 12,000 employees of the Halo Trust family, 16 of them are here. We're a small component. The UK organization is really the global headquarters for operations itself. Obviously they focus on support from the UK government, which is also one of our largest donors. But the 24-hour command center that sits in Scotland.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you. Um, Well, you highlighted a lot of areas of the world in which you are engaged, either have successfully demined the location or are working to, or working to. Are there areas of the world, and I imagine there are, that we are aware of that are affected by active landmines that you either haven't been able to get into to work or have your sights set on? And if so, what are some of those areas?
Well, one where there's an active recent conflict with significant mine laying is Sudan. So not just South Sudan, but Sudan proper, and the turmoil that they've gone through. And so there was active mine laying in Khartoum itself, in the capital.
Mm.
So we actually have an assessment team on the ground beginning next week that's looking into if there's a role for us to play there. Some of the other places where we do have some operations, but there's a lot more work to be done. Ethiopia, there was so much mine laying done around Tigray in that phase of the conflict. And then Myanmar, another place where we also have a presence and a small capacity, but there's just so much active mine laying being done in that conflict right now. There are other ends of the world, but those would be ones where we are not at the scale that we want to be, or in the case of Sudan, where we don't have operations active at present.
Gotcha. Of course, of course. Well, I see some questions starting to come in here, and just a reminder that if anybody does have questions, there's a Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen. I also, as the leader of this webinar, have the ability to allow people to talk. So if you'd prefer to deliver your question verbally, we can do that. If you just want to use the raise hand function, I'd be happy to turn on your mic and you deliver it that way. This question is fairly broad, but I'm sure you'll have some good answer for it. What are the biggest operational challenges that Halo faces on the ground when you're in a region? What are some things that you're consistently coming up against, apart from, just the natural safety and hazardous natures of landmines?
Oh, well, it's a good question. I would say, two two things. Well, there's the political context question. So in any given country, definitely the countries that are in conflict, we are always trying to ensure what is the safe space we can occupy. And that I have worked in Ukraine more than in any other of our countries in the last, well, since this phase of the war, and we cannot work within 30 kilometers of the line of contact. That's by law, but also increasingly that is a deadly zone that you need to stay away from. But being how close to that 30 millimeter or 30-kilometer buffer are you willing to work, and can you work, is a set of questions that we're always asking ourselves. Or quite frankly, with the U.S. engagement in Iran, we have to ask security questions of ourselves. Do we keep our operations going on in Iraq, right next door, where we could be targeted by proxies or inadvertently be caught up in the military engagement? In Afghanistan, we were targeted by ISIS, not the Taliban, but ISIS, who killed 12 of our colleagues in 2021. So there are a lot of these context questions that have to do with working in dangerous places. But then there's like the danger of our work itself. So I would say one of the biggest things, like in the technology space, that we're trying to overcome is, from World War II, when landmines really come into our universe, until today, that it's always looked like, someone with a detector finding a signal, they back up, and then you dig a 15 centimeter hole, and then you start trenching towards that signal. That's the most dangerous moment of our work. You're digging towards what could be a landmine, and if you're in a place where it's a legacy conflict and it's been in the ground for 50 years, and it could have shifted and moved, and maybe the pressure plate is facing you instead of facing up, you're in this dangerous exercise just to get to that landmine, to see if it is a landmine, and then to place a plastic explosive beside it and destroy it. We're trying to automate that process. We're trying to use micro excavators and right now we're starting with just remote operation of micro excavators, but we'd like to automate them using AI. We would still need as large of a workforce as we do, because there's all these other things around it. It's not us trying to take the deminer out of the process. It's trying to take the danger and the connection between the deminer from the danger. It's an exciting field. I mean, we can actually explore those things. We're testing those technologies out in Angola right now, and Ukraine at the same time, both places where we have complex needs. So those are some of the operational challenges that we face.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. You know, naturally, the work of demining these locations is crucial. I'm curious about the work on the front end of that. I mean, what can be done to eliminate the use of landmines to begin with? What have been different pushes maybe across the globe to really make the use of these incredibly devastating weapons to lessen them on the front end? So then you guys have less landmines to deactivate. I'm curious about the work on the front end of this issue.
Yeah. Well, certainly the landmine ban convention itself has had a massive impact, in the scale of landmine production prior to 1997, even today, even with the Russians doing what they're doing, the Chinese and the Iranians and North Koreans and a handful of others, it's a tiny sliver of production of landmines that you had before 1997. So it's important to remind ourselves that treaties can work and multilateralism can work. And in fact, one of the stories of that treaty process, beyond Princess Diana's moment, that is most evocative to me is that Italy used to be one of the biggest landmine producers in the world, and they had it was a it was a lucrative arms export, up through the 80s into the 90s. In fact, we still clear a lot of Italian landmines. And the unionized workers of one of the plants that was producing landmines basically pushed for the Mine Ban Convention itself, even though it led to their own employment being ultimately lost, which tells you, just the poignancy of that decision. I mean, I think Italy has a vibrant, arms industry still, so I don't think that it necessarily meant that all these people lost their employment. But to take that kind of advocacy position, even at the expense of your own potential economic future, is an interesting moment. I think now the bigger thing is resolving conflicts themselves, and that the Chinese and the Russians aren't going to join the Mine Ban Convention. They're going to keep these things in their inventories. It's the diplomacy around conflicts themselves that's needed. So the biggest things that we can do to curtail the use of landmines are resolving these kind of open source conflicts. Ukraine's an obvious one, but Myanmar, which gets a lot less attention. There are probably just as many people dying in any given year on landmines in Myanmar as there are in Ukraine.
Gosh. We have a question here from Karen. In addition to monetary donations, supporting letters to Congress and field operations, what additional volunteer opportunities might there be for someone, for instance, living here in Kansas City? How can we help your work?
It's a good point, and Lauren, my colleague, is on the line. I think in part we are looking to try to get the word out about what we do and try to equip voices to help tell our stories. So that's one thing. Beyond just the kind of click and send a letter to Congress. We are looking to mobilize advocates who can learn more about our work. Kind of go deep so that they can be true spokespeople for what we do. And when I say we, it's not just Halo, because when it comes to us talking about U.S. leadership on this issue, it's us advocating for all the different organizations, including local NGOs in the countries that we work who do benefit from U.S. funding, but they don't have a voice here in the U.S. So equipping voices to tell the story about this issue in your own community, that's something we'd love to work with you on.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We have just a few more minutes. I think what you're telling about the elephant population in Angola was incredibly interesting, and of course, like the human impact of landmines is immense. I think the conservation, the wildlife aspect of it is something that of course, but it wasn't immediately something that kind of came to mind. I was curious if there are any other examples of initiatives or successes that you've had in that aspect of the work.
We actually have more and more kind of engagements around conservation zones, in part that there's a lot of overlap between the most environmentally important biodiverse areas of the world and instability and conflict, that for a host of reasons that are beyond my, Evan, you may have a better academic background to discuss the antecedents of conflict, but it's a reality. It's a reality that even in places like Somalia, where we do landmine clearance too, there are these. It's not charismatic fauna like elephants. It's that the frankincense population. So like the trees that produce frankincense, the trees that were spoken about in the Bible, when we think about frankincense discussed in the Bible, the traditional area where that frankincense has come from since antiquity is right in these laced conflict zones where we are, clearing landmines, and we have now started to introduce ecological insight into how we clear them, because you probably can think of that image of the Ukrainian field where we've just cut down all of the vegetation so that we can clear the landmines. Well, we don't want to clear these ancient frankincense trees that are part of this, biological zone So we've had to make ourselves better stewards as we clear in a place like that. But there are lots of other places. Sri Lanka, which is another place of great biological diversity, we're similarly having to do that. We're having to find ways to clear landmines in coastal areas without destroying mangroves and things like that. So this has really only been in the last 5 years where we've, fortunately through a private foundation, have been able to better equip us to be those stewards, in part because chances are we're the only people operating in that area, because it's so deadly, so we can't just like form a partnership with World Wildlife Federation and just, we do our thing and they do their thing. Sometimes we can if we can work very carefully and we provide safety for them. But often we have to be the one to do that environmental intervention as well as the conflict intervention.
Mhm. That makes total sense. That makes total sense. Um, well, yeah, just as a kind of final to personalize it a bit, you said you've been with Halo now for about 6 years. Can you talk about that initial spur and your initial draw to the organization? Is there anything particularly in your background or a moment in time that really inspired you to this specific work with Halo?
Well, because I've been on the earth for a long time, so I can, and I was working in Southern Africa, in Mozambique and South Africa, both in the '90s in the kind of Princess Diana moment. So, even though in that line of my work, when I was working on democracy promotion, I was not out clearing landmines, but the the scale of the landmine crisis of that moment was present in my life. So certainly, I can remember. Uh, to that moment in a very clear way. But then also in my previous work before Halo, where I was working within the UN system and seeing the success of the Mine Ban Convention as like a symbol of the what multilateralism can achieve. But then at the same time, uh, working on UN humanitarian interventions in countries where landmines were and are a true crisis, and the intersections between those conflicts, landmines and refugees, like I was discussing with the 2015 example. Uh, all of those experiences were things that led me to the moment where, when I had this opportunity to come over to Halo, I jumped at it. And also, it's just Halo is such a visceral thing, that I enjoyed the work I did in the UN system, but and occasionally I would be in the field, but the great thing about Halo is, you are immersed in this work as soon as you get out the door into the field with our operations, and it allows you to see that direct benefit so clearly. In a place like Sri Lanka, where I had my first field experience, what was great is to see that we've cleared this land, and 1 kilometer down, that's where we were working 6 months ago, and in that area 1 kilometer down, 100 houses are already starting to be built. And these are folks who they've been locked away from their land since the '80s. That conflict really kicked off in the early '80s. They still have title hold on their land. They've held on to that title. They've been living in. They've come up. They've grown up. They were probably born in IDP camps, uh, but they're back, and they still own that land, and they're rebuilding. And there's just something rewarding and tangible about that. I love all of the experiences that I've had in the international system across a 30-year career, but this one's unique.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for your time today, taking us through the incredible work that Halo is doing. I hope everyone on this call takes this opportunity to further engage with the organization. I did post several links throughout that was sent to me by Lauren, including how to contact Congress to express the importance of the work, as well as to how to get involved from an advocacy perspective. So again, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. It means a lot that you were able to join us today.
It's a real pleasure. All the best to you and your community. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Just while I have everyone, just going to give just a few quick plugs for some upcoming events, and then I'll send you on your way. Tomorrow at our offices here in Midtown in Kansas City, we're going to have a program called Artificial Intelligence: What's Next with Sebastian Mallaby of the Council of Foreign Relations. That's from 6 to 7 p.m. That is free for members, pay what you can for non-members. Then on Thursday, we have a program called Science Meets Diplomacy: International Cooperation in Space. That's in partnership with the Linda Hall Library. That's at 6:30. And that will feature space journalist Jeff Faust and a panel of experts, which will explore the regulatory frameworks related to space cooperation and discuss the importance of maintaining outer space as an arena for international collaboration. On Wednesday, July 2nd, we have Diplomacy Through Music. So we'll have Tom Crane, who is an African music expert and the founder of KKFI, as well as Anita Dixon, who was key in having Kansas City be a UNESCO Creative City of Music. They'll be talking about music through the lens of diplomacy. And then on Tuesday, July 15th, we'll have Ambassador Joseph Manzo joining us for our Berkeley lecture. It will focus on national security, U.S. diplomacy. He's the former U.S. permanent representative to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, former faculty member of the National War College, and a senior seasoned member of the Senior Foreign Service. So that's on Tuesday, July 15th. All those can be found on our website. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today. Thank you again, Chris, and we'll hope to see everyone very soon.